Some people say you're just. They say you're not a smart guy. You're just a really dumb guy who talks fast and uses big words.
I'm really sick of this nonsense.
You know I'm a big fan of Ben Shapiro. I think he puts his words very eloquently and in a way that it makes it hard for people to come back at it because it logically makes so much sense. But in this interview, he makes a mistake multiple times. He does a lot of things right like he always does, but there's a mistake that I want to point out that I'm sure he'll improve with over the years as things continue. You know, he has so many repetitions of this because he goes on so many shows and gets so much experience doing it, but it is a mistake he continues to make. And it might be a little bit challenging for him because for the same reason he's able to rapid fire respond to these questions in such an eloquent way, he's in his head. He's always thinking through the next thing to say, which doesn't enable him to just kind of be in the energy of the group and ride that. So in this video, I'm gonna break down what he does well against Logan Paul and the guy who actually does more talking than Logan Paul, but also point out the things that he can improve upon. And notice in your own life, do you ever do this? A lot of people make the same mistake he does, but a lot of people aren't on a national stage like he is every single day. So let's roll this footage and we can watch the takes and then I'll break it down and explain to you what's going on.
Not even.
No,
it's a vicinity thing.
Well,
it's a
have
door
you
lock
ever,
situation.
but you've never even.
True.
I mean, maybe it helps you poop.
It could.
Who knows?
See, my only point is I think when we lock it away and I'm.
All right. That's the first thing I want you to notice. And this is very subtle, but this is very important because this is a point that most people don't understand. And it's a concept around pinging. Pinging just means you're looking at other people in their eyes to basically gauge their reaction to be sure that what you're doing is socially appropriate. So the less confident the person, the more they'll be pinging off the environment. Have you ever noticed people who are not very confident will constantly be looking around, especially after they tell a joke? Look around to be sure people think it's funny. Now, one thing Ben Shapiro typically does very well is he doesn't ping. He doesn't look at people. And that's why this caught my eye right away, because after he says his little thing, he's looking over at Logan. And albeit he was directing his comment at Logan, but this is one of the few times he pings. And the reason I start out with this is because for you, I want you to notice when you're around people, how much more do you ping or look them in the eye to gauge their response when you feel like you're the equal status as them or higher status, like maybe with your kids or maybe someone's working for you, versus someone who has higher status than you? How much more are you doing that? Because that's a tell to the other person subconsciously that you think they're of higher status when you continually look at them like that. So don't do that unless you want to be slotted as lower status. And before we get into this second one, I do want to say I'm kind of being tough on Shapiro in this video. This is a 2-hour video and I'm picking a lot of the stuff I think he could improve on because I think that's how you can learn. But you can also learn a lot from what he does right. So basically the whole 2 hours, he's doing things very, very right. So if you want, I'd encourage you to watch the actual video if you want to see that too, because if you've never seen this dude in action, it's pretty incredible.
Are you cool with the cancel culture or the woke Twitter left coming together to boycott a business based on their non-desire to serve transgenders or gay couples?
They have 100% right to do that.
Okay.
They have 100% right to do that. I may disagree with the boycott. Right, I may think the boycott is bad,
based on my
political beliefs, right?
Sure.
But they have every right to do that, and in fact, I think that that's a good part of American discourse.
So you would applaud. You would applaud.
I think.
And so, like, take a race example.
Okay, did you catch that right there? So what this guy was trying to do was to basically suck Shapiro into saying something a step further than what he wanted to. So he says, because Shapiro says, yeah, that's fine. And then he goes, you would applaud that.
So you would applaud. You would applaud.
I think.
Right? Kind of in the nice cadence of the conversation. So what are most people going to do? People who are thinking about the next thing they're going to say, they're going to be like, yeah. But then how is Shapiro going to be quoted? Ben Shapiro says he would applaud this and this and this, and that may actually not be his thoughts. So notice that Shapiro, this is very subtle. A lot of people wouldn't even notice this. Shapiro doesn't respond to that at all. He just acts like he didn't hear it. Trust me, he heard it. A guy at this level hears everything, but notice how all he does is goes on with his thought as if he didn't hear it. And this does two things. Number one, it prevents him from having to agree with something he doesn't agree with. But number two, it's really tough for the guy to ask that question to go back because he did say it in passing. So his strategy of saying it in passing, which most people are just going to ride and be like, yeah, it works for that. But then if it's ignored, how weird would it be if he went back and said, oh, so would you applaud that or not? Then he sounds like a weirdo for going back. So really, it's kind of a one-trick pony, and he can't go back and reiterate it to try to hold Shapiro's feet to the fire. But it works a lot of times that you don't have to do that because most people are just going to go along with it because it's something that they were kind of for in the past, and he just took it one step further.
Well, because again, I think these are the best. They have 100% right to do that. I may disagree with the boycott.
Okay. So he says they have a right. Let's go back and get into this deeper. They have a right to do it. I may disagree with the boycott. And then the guy comes on and says, so you would applaud that. So actually, it was a bigger step than what I thought. But notice once again how he handles this.
Right. I may think the boycott is
based on my
political beliefs, right?
Sure.
But they have every right to do that. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I think that that's a good part of American discourse.
So you would applaud. You would applaud.
I think.
And so, like, take a race example because again, I think
just
these
keeps
are the best
going
examples.
on.
The answer is you were not smarter than Thomas Jefferson. You're not a product of Thomas Jefferson's time. You didn't live in 1770. You live in 2019. And if you think that you would have thought like...
Do you see right there? That's a little confidence, just enough to talk over people. Now, Shapiro has a nice balance of that, and if someone interrupts him with a good point, it's not like he'll always talk over him. I actually saw an interview of Neil deGrasse on the Joe Rogan show. I think that's how you say his name. And I actually like his demeanor, but he just keeps talking over Rogan. Maybe I'll try to throw a clip in here real quick.
So specifically, these things have to
Europeans
take place.
didn't come to.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
But in Harry Potter, the
I understand.
Okay, so that is,
and it's just so annoying. You have to know when to talk over people. And basically, if your point is strong and you have something strong to finish that you want to fit in, it's good to talk over people. If people are just trying to bulldoze you to show social status, it's good to talk over people. If your point is basically already been made and someone else is coming with an honest thought, then it's good to let them talk over you. That's kind of a good benchmark to use.
Ben, what's your favorite cereal?
Okay, I'm going to go off the board here. You ready for this? Crispecks.
Whoa.
Okay.
Whoa, is that the square?
Wow.
The squares?
The hexagons, right?
Yeah, that's right. They're the ones that they're half corn checks and half rice checks. And they're unavailable anywhere. And I ordered them in bulk from Amazon.
Really?
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding you.
I don't know why that slightly doesn't surprise me.
I
don't know why.
Because it's the most boring, obnoxious cereal in the world. That would be it right there.
Okay, that's a great example of self-deprecative humor. And it's funny too, right? He's got no problem poking jokes, especially at the facade. So especially at what people yuck it up. They say something about it. Maybe if some guy's known to be fat, then he makes a fat joke about himself. It's really well timed and it's really funny. And a lot of times when you position yourself as a very high social status person, that self-deprecation goes a lot further. If you have lower status and you do that, you just look like somebody who's trying to be supplicative to everybody. But the higher your status, the more you can pepper in that self-deprecation, which actually makes you more relatable and it shows people you're not just pompous and arrogant.
I don't know why that slightly doesn't surprise me.
I
don't know
because it's the most boring, obnoxious cereal in the world. That would be it right there.
My dad was a fan of these. Always had the Crispix line.
Oh yeah, that's solid. The fundamental thing that is different about dating when you're Orthodox is obviously you're dating for marriage. So for me, it was you're looking for shared values. We were talking about kids, like how you would raise kids on the first date, and you do that on normal first dates in the Orthodox community.
I do that more so as a strategy to give them hope. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
you're sick.
Well, yes, but
you're
also
twisted.
Yes, but also like.
All right, so here's an example, the first example, and this is one that is a bit more of a stretch. There's more direct examples of this. But Logan Paul, he makes a joke. Shapiro, basically, as you heard, says, he was very serious about getting married, so they talked about raising kids in the first date. Logan Paul says he does that just to show the girl that there's hope that they'll be dating in long term. So it's a joke. So whether you think that joke is funny or not, he's trying to lighten the mood, which is a positive because this is getting very serious and his audience isn't necessarily that interested in political discourse. So he's trying to lighten the mood. Shapiro kind of gives a courtesy laugh. He doesn't think it's that funny. Maybe, I don't know what his thoughts are on it, but he just goes silent. And I think this is a good example. Even if he didn't think that joke is funny, throw in a comment just to relate. Be like, everyone's got different dating strategies to even show that you have different thoughts on that. But I think he kind of isolates himself when he just kind of gets quiet and look at his body language. He'll tuck in here it a little bit. I think if he would just ride that energy and realize, he's with some younger guys, some bro-y type of guys, that doesn't mean you can't relate to him just because they have different thoughts than you. I think that's something that he could do that would make people feel like he fits in this environment a little bit more.
Don't we all love to fantasize about what could be, huh? Like don't tell me you haven't gone on a first date and you're like, yo, how crazy would it be if we got married?
I generally don't say that.
This is our first date, and we get to tell them this story.
Right, but I don't do it to give them hope. I'm like making sure this chick is
He just kind of freezes up there.
like not crazy.
Do you think that allegiance to your
And the thing is, by him doing that, causes this guy to get sucked right back into that very serious frame. You can even hear Logan Paul. He's like, well, what anyway? When he goes back into that, he was trying to lighten it up. So I think a very advanced social move would have him just have been to pepper in a few things. Like, man, everyone's got different philosophies on dating. What is it like here, dating in LA? Ask him a question. Let him ride that energy, because the energy got lighter for a minute. But because Shapiro is kind of in this instance like the dark hole sucking it back into his frame, he has a very strong frame. And that's why this guy got sucked right in. Okay, but back to the interview questions right away. I think it would have been nice if he could have rode that light energy for more, maybe 20, 30 seconds and then gone back into it.
I'm really sick of this nonsense where, because I acknowledge that I have been privileged to have good things happen to me in my life.
Okay, now listen to the way he expresses himself in a hot button issue. He's clearly emotionally reactive to this, but he doesn't go off the cuff, but he expresses just enough emotion to get your attention and realize this is not just another response to a regular question. I'm actually going to let his whole response play here and notice here. I'm sure you can hear it yourself, but just so you can kind of pick it out. He basically says that this guy, before the interview, some girl he was with said, tell Shapiro to check his white man's privilege at the door, and it makes him angry. And so many people, when they hear something that makes them angry, they go so on tilt and show so much emotional reactivity that it makes them look low status. Or if you have no emotional activity, then you don't get your point across and show people it's an important issue to you. So Shapiro does a really nice job of walking the line of picking it up a notch, but not being completely out of control and swearing and swinging his arms. Watch this reaction here.
Folks,
we took questions from Twitter, and one of the girls said, I'm worried to watch this, and she said, just make sure he checks his privilege.
So I'm so sick of that shit. I'm sorry. Like if you want to tell me that I am privileged, there are certain ways in which I am privileged. There are certain ways in which we are all privileged, frankly. Mm-hmm. And the level of privilege obviously differs by your life story, right? Like thank God, my biggest privilege, I grew up in a stable 2-parent household. That is my number one privilege. My parents are wonderful, wonderful people, right? That is my number one privilege. And I grew up in a pretty solidly middle-class household for most of my childhood. I mean, until I was 11, we were living in like an 1,100 square foot house. I have 3 younger sisters. I shared a room with all of my siblings, and we had 1 bathroom for 6 people. So it wasn't like we grew up loaded or anything, but it is a privilege to live with 2 parents who love you, take care of you, provide for you, share a set of values with you.
Is that the greatest privilege? And
it is the most important privilege in America.
Do you think it
run well because the administration was a problem because the rules were set differently, right?
So it allows that change, right? Is what you're talking about?
More freedom is better. More choice is better. Right?
Yeah.
This is a good thing, right?
It forces those systems to have to adapt and change.
This is
everybody's
Spencer's
leaving.
specialty. He's been working at Education Doc for the past 6 years. He's about to do a cross-country tour. He's met with some of the biggest educators, legislators in the education space. So this is right up his alley.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is super important stuff. I mean, when you're talking,
okay, what did you notice right there? Can you pick something out that he did incorrect? This is the biggest blunder, I think, in the whole interview. So this guy's given the guy in the orange headband props. They're talking about school systems and voucher systems. And he's basically like, this guy's dedicating his life to this. He's met with all these people. Shapiro doesn't even acknowledge it. How easy would have it been to be like, oh man, that's really cool. This is right in your wheelhouse. Or just some sort of like, cool, man. Shapiro doesn't even acknowledge it. And I don't think it's because he's trying to be rude. He's just in his head thinking, facts, what can I say? This is the next thing I need to say. Not riding the energy again. If he could back off, this is another kind of example of when Logan Paul made that joke and he wasn't riding the energy. So this is a subtle nuance. This one's not as subtle. But I just think to really elevate him to the next social level, if he's more aware of the energy and makes his decisions based on that at least a little bit. You know, there's only maybe 3 or 4 times in this whole 2-hour interview he could have done that, but it would have made a big difference. I guarantee, like something like this guy, imagine something that you basically dedicate your life to do, and some big name like Ben Shapiro, even if it's not like an idol of his, comes on. It's like, that's really cool, man. You know, we look at it this way. You have a conversation about that. And he's like, man, that Ben Shapiro guy, I met him, he's great. Versus now, I bet if somebody asked this guy what he thinks of Ben Shapiro, he's like, yeah, he's a smart dude, and I'm probably not a dude I'd hang out with. It's so easy to be likable when you do the right things, the easy things. And all Shapiro would have had to do right now is acknowledge the fact that this guy's a specialist to say, cool, this guy spends 15 seconds hyping him up, and Shapiro just completely ignores it. So watch it back and think in your head next time that happens, how you can just say something like, that's really cool, man. What are your thoughts on this? I'm interested. If you've been spending all much time, you met with these people, cool. Who have you met with? That's awesome. I met with some people too. Just anything to get the conversation going to acknowledge that.
This is a good thing, right?
It forces those systems to have to adapt and change.
This
as
is
everybody's
Spencer's
leaving.
specialty. He's been working at education doc for the past 6 years. He's about to do a cross country tour. He's met with some of the biggest educators, legislators in the education space. So this is right up his alley.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is super important stuff. I mean, when you're talking about increasing opportunity for people, the
spends 15 seconds hyping him up, and Shapiro doesn't acknowledge it.
No, Kim Jong-un's international interest did not change because he sent you a nice letter. He's an evil dictator who's keeping millions of people in a gulag, and he has an interest in maintaining his power source by developing nuclear weapons and missiles. I mean, that has not changed just because you're nice to him. So,
or because Dennis Rodman goes.
Exactly, but by the same token, when Trump says about him, like, he's the...
So another example right there. This is the last example of that. So he tries to make a Dennis Rodman joke, right, to kind of lighten it up, because this is a podcast, and usually they have different types of guests on there. So everyone can kind of tell it's getting very serious, and they want to make it lighter. So he makes a Rodman joke, and what does Shapiro do? Just completely ignores it. Why? Because he has more to say. So in that instance, if he would have made some sort of joke or even acknowledge, it's not even hard. You don't even have to pretend like you think a joke is funny or not. You're just acknowledging the other person. And if he was thinking about this from a really stand back perspective, he'd be like, okay, maybe these guys are trying to lighten it up a little bit. Let's talk about some lighter things. Let's make a few jokes. Let's talk about Rodman for a minute. Let's talk about my thoughts on Rodman. Just anything to acknowledge it, because when you totally ignore when people pepper things in, it makes them feel unheard. And in this instance, Shapiro didn't realize they were trying to lighten the mood a bit.
By developing nuclear weapons and missiles. I mean, that has not changed just because you're nice to him. So,
or because Dennis Rodman goes.
Exactly, but by the same token, when Trump says about him, like,
you're freaking out.
Ben, thank you, bro. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate
yeah, of
it.
course, man. I wish I could have spoke more, but
it's okay. I took up all the time.
No, it's kind of your thing, and I enjoyed listening to you.
So I thought that was kind of weird. I mean, it's not like, I don't think that was too pre-calculated, but he basically said, I didn't get to talk because it's kind of your thing to just talk the whole time.
Oh yeah, one quick question. Some people say you're they say you're not a smart guy. You're just a really dumb guy who talks fast and uses big words.
And then I think it's weird that he wanted to end it with like a very negative question. Like typically, you know, the old adage, you want to leave people on a high note. So like in a conversation, you always want to leave when emotions are good and you say something people like and laugh. But he's ending it, number one, cracking at him, saying, you know, it's kind of your thing to talk the whole time. What do you say to people that basically say you're a dummy? I don't like that. I think they could have definitely lightened it up and left on more of a high note.
What do you say to those people? Do you even acknowledge that comment?
What's the metric, by the way?
I mean, are we doing metric by like IQ?
No, I don't know. Just like
my education.
Let me tell you a quick story that pertains to this. I just got back from an event and I was talking to a guy who found out I was a social coach, and he was just telling me he hates things like this, where we were at, because he never knows what to say when he goes up to people to start a conversation with strangers. He always runs out of small talk and they just kind of end up there kind of, you know, that old man rock where you just kind of rock on your toes and it gets awkward. I was like, man, that's a terrible feeling because these events are supposed to be fun. If this is something you want to improve in, I've got a program called the Social Invincibility Program where I'll personally walk you through the steps that you need to become confident in this. If you've been following the channel for a while, you might be interested to know I've got a new video up explaining the program. That one that I had up was so old, I finally re-recorded another one. So you can go to socialinvincibility.com or you can touch or click up here, or I'll put a link in the description below if you want to learn more about how to get those conversation skills up to snuff. Now, you seen this video right here? If you haven't, highly suggest you touch or watch it right now. I'll talk to you there.